Well, ladies and gentlemen, recently I brought you a video around News 24 and how they were currently being featured in America by the National Security Agency as being possibly promulgators of, well, fake news in South Africa, a narrative that's being pushed forward, according to them, by the presidency's spy agencies. But before we get on to the main video, can I yet again remind you that if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It really does help. So let's actually have a look at the article that I want to look at today. And this is the news story that, according to News 24, they reproduced an article from Reuters. And the title of the article is Israel Kills One of Gaza's Bravest Journalists, even though the IDF claims he was a Hamas cell leader. So apparently what's happened is that an Israeli airstrike occurred in Gaza City, killing a prominent Al Jazeera journalist. Now, this journalist, along with 4 of their other Al Jazeera colleagues and an assistant in a tent near a hospital, were all killed, and the IDF asserted that, well, he was a Hamas cell leader, using his journalistic role as a disguise to orchestrate attacks against Israeli forces and citizens, and citing intelligence documents as evidence. Now, in response, Al Jazeera and the International Press Freedom Organization strongly condemned the strike, denouncing it as a targeted assassination that undermines the press freedom. They rejected the IDF's allegations and pointed to a lack of credible evidence, and we're going to get to that in a second. So, it's been widely reported that this respected colleague was on the front line reporting from Gaza and providing vital coverage amid restricted access for international media. It's important to understand that in Gaza, the only people that can report are, well, Hamas-accredited individuals, because remember, it's Gaza, it's controlled by Hamas. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's look to see who this famous journalist was. So, let's start off with exhibit number 1. Here is said journalist praising the October 7th massacre. He took smiling selfies with Hamas leaders, and here's the footage itself you can watch.
وفي هذه الصور التاريخية الآن وحدة الظل تصل إلى هذا المكان، وهذه الصور عبر شاشة الجزيرة الحصرية، ونشاهد الأسيرة والمجندة الإسرائيلية. الآن نشاهد هذه المجندة الإسرائيلية التي سيتم الإفراج عنها في هذه الصور المباشرة عبر شاشة الجزيرة. نشاهد هذه الصور هي.
You may look at that and say, well, what does that prove? Well, here is his social media post from 13th of December 2021, in which he said that Hamas was the spearhead in defending all Arabs and Muslims. So he was a Hamas supporter in 2021. Remember that October 7th only occurred in 2023. Now, to be fair to the journalist himself, it's important to recognize that him at age 29 had apparently already suffered some personal losses during the conflict. So his home was apparently attacked, his father was killed, and despite that, he remained a prominent voice in Gaza, often reporting from the front lines. At least that's the narrative that's going to be pushed forward. Now, just minutes before the strike, he posted a tweet saying, "Relentless bombings for 2 hours now. The Israelis' attack on Gaza City has been intensifying." His report resonated with over 500,000 followers across social media. So you may look at that and say, well, actually, maybe he had a point. Maybe he was just a poor, misunderstood individual. And maybe had he been known a little bit better, well, maybe people wouldn't have viewed him in such a negative light. But then I'm reminded that from a Telegram post that he himself made on the 7th of October 2023, Exhibit A, you can see that he himself stated that 9 hours into the Hamas individuals doing the massacre in Israel, apparently the heroes are still roaming the country and killing and capturing. He said, God, how great you are. So, yeah, we're reminded that this poor, innocent individual who suffered amazing losses, apparently, and was just misunderstood, was praising people being actively killed on the 7th of October 2023. Now, when you do so again and retribution comes for you, well, clearly it's not your fault, right? Because accountability doesn't actually exist. So as you can see, in typical fashion in the United Kingdom, Sky News says that Al Jazeera condemns assassination of its journalists, and a response was made by an actual hostage that had been held in Gaza, and he said, Well, I was held by a journalist in captivity, and his father was a doctor. Which means what? Now, you see, a number of photos have come out with this journalist with the leadership of Hamas. But you would also be forgiven for noticing that a number of the so-called journalists in Palestine do generally tend to have a Hamas bend. In fact, there are numerous pictures circulating around said journalists in one frame looking like a journalist and in the next frame being an Islamic fighter, which shows you that the suggestion that the IDF make that actually these individuals are posing as journalists but actually are Hamas fighters actually might have a point. We are also reminded that the allegations came out of Al Jazeera. Now, Al Jazeera isn't actually really a proper media outlet. In fact, let us not forget that the Qatar royal family does not allow journalism in Qatar. And the Qatar royal family's international TV network, Al Jazeera, is owned by them, and so we're meant to take from that apparently they don't allow journalism in Qatar, but they allow it on the international sphere, and they're not a propaganda wing for their proxy wars. Yeah, we're buying that, and if you do, well, you need your head checked. But very curiously, we are constantly reminded that starvation is occurring in Gaza, and it's a bad thing. But we also reminded that recently there was a video posted by Hamas itself of an individual that they captured on October 7th, took as a hostage, that he himself is looking very starved, and Hamas made him dig his own grave on camera. And here's a picture of the individual before he was captured, and here's him digging his own grave. And you'll notice that this didn't really make the same news. And so while starvation has been claimed as a weapon by Hamas, the starvation occurring against the original people which they captured on October 7th, well, that's okay, because the media says so. Now, it's very curious to note what the actual Prime Minister of Israel had to say about the starvation tactics, and he claimed that there was no starvation. He said there was no genocide, and that if he really wanted to commit genocide, he could do it in an afternoon. So the question then really has to become, why is it that there's been so much public opinion in Europe on this very topic, and why is it that Europe and many other countries are now talking out? And actually, the Prime Minister of Israel had this to say about the entire thing.
I think there's an issue here. And the issue is many leaders tell me, look, we know you're right, but we can't stand, in the face of the public opinion in our country, especially European leaders. They tell me that over and over again. And I say, that is your problem. It is not our problem. It is not our problem.
So as you can see, he's saying, well, in many instances, any reason that this is all occurring is because many of these nations now have sizable Muslim populations that they really don't upset these individuals for logical reasons. In any case, one has to ask the question, with all of the evidence right there, that said individual was not a journalist and was very much in cahoots with Hamas, having opinions that you might not class as being unbiased, why did News 24 still print an article basically saying about how this poor journalist had been killed? Because that's not what happened. In any case, do let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until next time, bye.